In the autumn of 1891, a lithographer named Alistair Wynn walked into the offices of the Providence Herald carrying a leather portfolio. Inside were 17 drawings, each more disturbing than the last. They depicted scenes from around Providence, Rhode Island, the docks at twilight, a boarding house on Benefit Street, the alley behind St. John's Cathedral. But it wasn't the settings that unnerved the editor. It was the figure appearing in every single sketch. A man. Tall, gaunt, dressed in clothes slightly out of fashion. And in every drawing, this stranger stood in places Alistair himself frequented. At his favorite coffee house, outside his lithography studio, standing at the foot of his own bed. "He's always there," Wynn told the editor, his hands trembling. "I see him everywhere I go. I've tried to stop drawing him, but my hands won't listen." 3 weeks later, Alistair Wynn vanished from his boarding house without a trace. His room was found locked from the inside, his possessions untouched, his bed neatly made. The only thing missing was Alistair himself. And the only thing left behind was a final sketch, pinned to his easel with a single word written beneath it. Ready. The drawing showed the same gaunt stranger, but this time he was smiling. If this already has you hooked, hit that subscribe button. Because the story of Alistair Wynn is one of the strangest unsolved disappearances in New England history. Alistair Wynn was not a man prone to flights of fancy. Born in 1857 to a respectable Boston merchant family, he came to Providence in his early 20s to pursue commercial lithography. By 1891, he had established himself as a skilled craftsman at Blackwood & Sons printing house on Westminster Street, producing advertising posters and botanical illustrations. Those who knew him described Alistair as methodical, reserved, utterly devoted to his craft. He lived alone in a modest boarding house on Benefit Street, kept to a rigid schedule, and spent his evenings sketching by lamplight until past midnight. He was a quiet tenant, his landlady, Mrs. Dorothea Havering, later told police. Never late with rent, never a complaint, but in those final weeks, something changed. He stopped sleeping. I could hear him pacing at all hours, talking to himself or to someone else, though I knew he was alone. The change began on September 3rd, 1891. Alistair had been working late at the Blackwood studio when he noticed something in the darkened window, the reflection of a man standing behind him. But when he turned around, no one was there. I attributed it to exhaustion, he wrote in his journal that night. Still, the image stays with me. He was tall, thin as a rail, with hollow cheeks and eyes too large for his face. His clothes were dark, a long coat. When I turned, he was gone, but I swear I felt him watching me still. Over the following days, Alistair began seeing the figure more frequently, at first only in reflections, shop windows, puddles, his morning coffee. But soon he claimed to see the man directly, standing at the far end of alleys, seated in church pews, waiting at street corners as Alistair walked home. He never moves, Alistair wrote on September 10th. He simply stands and watches. I've tried to approach him twice, but each time I draw near, he's gone. Not walking away, simply absent, as if he were never there. Am I losing my mind? By mid-September, Alistair had begun sketching the figure compulsively. His journal entries show a man descending into obsession, filling pages with detailed drawings of the stranger, the sharp angles of his face, the loose coat, the unsettling depth of his eyes. It helps to draw him, he wrote on September 18th. When I put him on paper, I feel as though I have control, but the relief never lasts. Within hours, I see him again. His co-workers at Blackwood & Sons noticed the change. Samuel Blackwood told police that Alistair had become withdrawn and distracted, often ruining prints. He kept looking over his shoulder, Blackwood said. I asked if everything was all right, and he just stared at me and said, "He's getting closer." By late September, Alistair Wynn had produced dozens of sketches, and according to his journal, the man was no longer content to watch from a distance. He was appearing inside Alistair's room. On September 28, 1891, Alistair wrote one of his most disturbing journal entries. "He was in my room tonight. I woke at 2:30 to find him standing at the foot of my bed, perfectly still, staring down at me. The moonlight came through the window, but it did not touch him. He seemed to exist in his own shadow. I wanted to scream, but my voice would not come. I could only lie there, frozen, while he watched. Then, slowly, he raised one hand and pointed to my easel. I understood what he wanted. God help me, I understood. He wanted me to draw him, so I lit the lamp with shaking hands and drew him exactly as he stood. When I finished, I looked up, and he was gone." This marked a turning point. Over the next 2 weeks, Alistair produced 17 elaborate drawings, each depicting a specific Providence location rendered with technical precision. Yet in every single drawing, the gaunt stranger appeared. In one, he stood on the long wharf with dock hands moving cargo around him. In another, he sat in the corner of the Providence Athenaeum reading room, unnoticed by other patrons. A third showed the hallway of Alistair's boarding house, with the stranger half visible in the doorway of his room. What made these drawings particularly unsettling was their accuracy. Investigators later confirmed that Alistair had captured every detail with photographic precision. The exact arrangement of barrels, specific book titles, even wallpaper patterns. These weren't imaginative compositions. They were documentary records. Records of a man being stalked by something that might not be entirely human. Samuel Blackwood recalled when Alistair brought several drawings to the studio. He asked if I could see him, the man in the drawings. I said, of course, he was right there. But Alistair shook his head and said, "No, I mean, do you recognize him? Have you seen him before?" I looked more carefully. There was something deeply unsettling about the figure. The proportions were slightly off. The way he stood seemed wrong, as if he didn't belong to the same world. I told Alistair I'd never seen anyone like that, and he just nodded and said, "Neither have I. Not in life, anyway." Mrs. Havering witnessed Alistair's decline. He stopped eating, rarely left his room except for work. I could hear him at all hours, always scratching away. Sometimes I'd hear him talking, having whole conversations. I put my ear to the door once and heard him say, "I don't understand what you want from me." Then silence. No other voice. Just silence. On October 14th, Alistair stopped going to work. When Samuel Blackwood sent a messenger, Alistair refused to open the door, calling through it, "Tell Mr. Blackwood I cannot come. He's here all the time now. I can't leave. He won't let me." The next day, October 15th, Alistair made his fateful visit to the Providence Herald. Editor Charles Reeves later told police, "He looked like he hadn't slept in weeks. Eyes bloodshot, hands trembling, constantly looking over his shoulder. He spread out the drawings and said, 'You have to publish these. People need to see him. Someone must recognize him.'" Reeves examined the drawings with growing unease. They were masterfully executed, but profoundly disturbing. The figure seemed to be looking directly at the viewer, no matter what angle you looked from, and his expression, it was expectant, as if he were waiting for something. When Reeves said the newspaper couldn't publish such images without context, Alistair became agitated. He grabbed my arm and said, "You don't understand. He's not just in the drawings. He's real. And now he's showing up in places before I get there. He's waiting for me." Alistair explained he'd seen the stranger at locations he hadn't yet visited. "Yesterday, I took a different route home. But when I turned onto Benefit Street, he was already there, standing in front of my boarding house, waiting. How could he know I would go home? How could he be there first?" When Reeves suggested exhaustion or nervous strain, Alistair replied quietly, "I know what's happening. He's not following me anymore. He's replacing me, bit by bit, place by place. He's taking over my life, and when he's done, I'll be gone, as if I never existed. He gathered his drawings and left. It was the last time anyone outside his boarding house saw Alistair Wynn alive. On the morning of October 22nd, 1891, Mrs. Havering knocked on Alistair's door to deliver a message from his employer. When he didn't answer, she fetched her master key, but the door was locked from the inside, and her key wouldn't turn the bolt. She summoned another boarder, and together they called for Alistair repeatedly. When there was no response, they contacted the police. 2 officers arrived within the hour. After repeated attempts to rouse Alistair failed, they forced the door. It took considerable effort. The door wasn't just locked, but seemed barricaded from within. Finally, with a splintering crack, the door gave way. The room beyond was empty, but empty in the strangest possible way. The bed was neatly made, sheets tucked with precision, Alistair's clothes hung in the wardrobe, shoes arranged beneath. His personal effects were all in their proper places. The oil lamp still had fuel. A half-empty water glass sat on the windowsill. Everything was exactly as it should be, except Alistair Wynn was nowhere to be found. The police searched thoroughly. The window was locked from inside, its frame painted shut years earlier. The walls were solid plaster over brick with no hidden passages. The floorboards were secure. "It's as if he simply ceased to exist," one officer wrote. There is no explanation for how a grown man could have left this room when all points of egress were secured from within. But while Alistair was gone, evidence of his final weeks remained. The room was filled with drawings, dozens of sketches pinned to walls, layered 3 and 4 deep. More spread across the floor in careful rows, still more stacked on every surface. Every single one depicted the same gaunt stranger. The police counted over 100 drawings, but it was the easel in the room's center that drew their attention. It held a single, large sheet, perhaps 2 feet by 3 feet. The drawing showed the interior of room 7 itself, rendered in meticulous detail. The bed, wardrobe, desk, window, everything exactly as it appeared in the actual room. The perspective was from the doorway, but the room in the drawing was not empty. The gaunt stranger stood in the center, facing the viewer. His hands were at his sides, his expression calm and somehow satisfied. Beneath the drawing, in Alistair's precise handwriting, was a single word: ready. Mrs. Havering gasped when she saw it. "That's him. That's the man I heard Mr. Wynn talking to. I never saw him myself, but that's exactly how Mr. Wynn described him." When asked if she'd seen anyone enter or leave Alistair's room, she shook her head. "No one. Mr. Wynn hadn't had visitors in months, and I would have heard anyone on the stairs. They creaked terribly. No, he was alone up here. Always alone." Alistair's journal, found in his writing desk, contained entries up until October 21st, the day before his disappearance. The final entry was brief, almost matter-of-fact. "He told me tonight that it's almost time. I asked what he meant and he pointed to the easel, so I'm drawing it now. The final picture. I understand what he wants. He wants my place, my room, my life, and when I finish this drawing, I think he'll have it. I should be frightened. I was, for so long. But now I just feel tired. Tired of fighting, tired of running, tired of trying to understand something that cannot be understood. If anyone reads this, know that I did not go unwillingly into the dark. I went because I had no other choice. He would not leave until I let him have what he wanted. My place in the world, my existence, myself. God have mercy on my soul." Below the entry was a small sketch in the margin, a man walking away down a long corridor fading into darkness. The man's shoulders were slumped, his head bowed. He looked like someone who had given up. The police investigation continued for weeks, but no trace of Alistair Wynn was ever found. No body recovered. No witnesses. His bank account remained untouched. His possessions remained in room 7. For all intents and purposes, Alistair Wynn had vanished from the face of the earth. In the weeks following Alistair's disappearance, the case attracted considerable attention. The Providence Herald ran a front-page story. Local artist vanishes from locked room. Police baffled. Other newspapers picked it up, each adding their own speculations about mental breakdowns, secret passages, or supernatural explanations. Mrs. Havering closed room 7 and refused to rent it. "There's something wrong with that room now," she told a reporter. "I can't explain it, but I feel it every time I go in there. It's like the air is heavier, like something is waiting. I won't have another tenant there. Not ever." The drawings were collected as evidence and stored in the police station basement. Samuel Blackwood requested their return, claiming they were valuable examples of Alistair's skill. The police refused, stating they were evidence in an ongoing investigation. But in December 1891, something unusual happened. Police clerk Harold Matthews was working late, organizing evidence. He came across Alistair's drawings and, curious, examined them by lamplight. He later described what happened. "I spread several drawings on the table. The craftsmanship was remarkable, but deeply unsettling. As I studied them, I began to feel watched. I looked up and glanced around. Of course, I was alone, or so I thought. But out of the corner of my eye, I saw movement in the far corner where the shadows were deepest. I raised the lamp, and I swear on my mother's grave, someone was standing there, a tall, thin man in dark clothes, perfectly still, watching. I called out, asking who he was. He didn't answer, just stood there. I approached him, intending to apprehend him for trespassing, but with each step he seemed to recede further into the shadows. Then, when I was perhaps 10 feet away, he simply wasn't there. The corner was empty. I searched the entire basement. All doors were locked from inside. Yet, I know what I saw. And when I returned to the table, the figure in the drawings seemed to be looking in a slightly different direction, as if he had turned his head to watch me leave. Matthew's report was filed and forgotten, but he wasn't the only one to experience something unusual. In February 1892, Detective Robert Ashford investigated the case further. He believed identifying the figure might solve Alistair's disappearance, so he took several drawings and showed them around Providence, asking if anyone recognized the man. No one did, but many had the same unsettled reaction. "There's something wrong about him," one shopkeeper said. "He doesn't look quite right, like he's not a real person." During those 2 weeks, Ashford began experiencing what Alistair had described, seeing the figure at street corners, in churches, watching from abandoned buildings, always at a distance, always watching, always gone when approached. On March 3rd, 1892, Ashford requested reassignment. His report was terse, but clear that something had disturbed him deeply. The final paragraph read, "I can no longer continue investigation into the Wynn disappearance. The case has taken a toll on my health and peace of mind. I respectfully request reassignment and recommend that the drawings be destroyed or sealed away permanently. They are not safe to be viewed or studied." His request was granted. The drawings were sealed and moved to storage outside the city. The case was officially closed as unsolved, but the story didn't end there. Over following decades, there were sporadic reports. In 1903, a historian researching Providence's artistic heritage tried to locate the drawings. She was told they'd been lost in an 1895 warehouse fire, though no record of such a fire exists. In 1921, a Boston antiquarian claimed to have purchased a portfolio of drawings from an estate sale, depicting Providence scenes with a mysterious gaunt figure. He displayed them for 3 days before removing them, stating they gave him terrible dreams and made him feel watched by something that wanted what I had. In 1947, a Providence librarian discovered Alistair's journal in uncatalogued documents. She began researching the case, but abruptly abandoned it after 2 weeks. When asked why, she said, "Some stories don't want to be told, and some questions don't want to be answered." And there, the case might have remained, buried in archives, except for one final chilling detail that emerged decades later. In 1968, during renovations of the old boarding house on Benefit Street, workers discovered a loose baseboard in what had been room 7. Behind it, they found a small tin box hidden in the wall, possibly for more than 70 years. Inside were 3 items: a tarnished brass key, a folded newspaper clipping about Alistair's disappearance, and a photograph. The photograph was a formal studio portrait showing a man seated in a chair, hands resting on his knees, staring directly at the camera with an expression neither smile nor frown. The man was tall and thin, with hollow cheeks and deep-set eyes. He wore a dark coat that hung loose on his gaunt frame. On the back, written in faded ink, was a date: October 21st, 1891. The day before Alistair Wynn disappeared. The construction foreman brought the box to the Providence Historical Society. A staff member recognized the date and its connection to the Wynn case and began investigating further. They contacted the police department to see if any records remained. By chance, a single file folder had survived, containing Officer Ashford's reports and descriptions of the drawings, including detailed notes about the mysterious figure. When the Historical Society compared these descriptions to the photograph, the match was undeniable. The man in the photograph was identical to the figure in Alistair's drawings. Every detail matched: the facial proportions, clothing style, even the unsettling quality of his gaze. But there was a significant problem. The photograph was dated October 21st, 1891. But according to Alistair's journal and witness statements, he had been drawing this figure for weeks before that date. He first saw him on September 3rd. He'd been sketching him obsessively throughout September and into October. How could a photograph dated October 21st depict someone Alistair had been drawing for more than 6 weeks? Unless the photograph had been taken before the encounter began, which seemed impossible since Alistair's journal made clear he'd never seen the man before September 3rd. Or unless something far stranger was at work. The Historical Society staff member investigating the case, Catherine Mills, became increasingly troubled. She wrote in her notes, "There is something profoundly wrong about this image. I've looked at thousands of historical photographs, and I've never encountered one that affected me this way. When I look at it, I feel as though the man is not merely sitting for a portrait. He's waiting, expecting something. And the longer I study it, the more I feel he's waiting for me specifically. I've tried to research the photograph, to identify the studio, trace its provenance, but I found nothing. The paper is consistent with 1890s materials, but there are no studio marks, no photographer's signature. It's as if it appeared from nowhere. Last night, I dreamed about the man. He was standing in my apartment, in the corner by the window, watching me sleep. When I woke, I found myself compulsively sketching his face on the notepad by my bed. I don't remember picking up the pencil. I don't remember drawing. But there he was, rendered in my own hand, staring up at me. I'm going to stop researching this case. I think Mrs. Frost was right. Some stories don't want to be told." Catherine sealed the photograph back in the tin box and placed it in the Historical Society's restricted archives, with a note stating it should not be displayed or studied without special permission. She never spoke of the case again. The box remained in the archives for years, occasionally examined by researchers who stumbled across it, but rarely pursued the matter further. Most reported feeling uneasy. Some claimed to experience vivid, disturbing dreams afterward. One researcher in the 1980s requested the photograph be removed entirely, stating, "This image should not exist. It should not be preserved. Something is wrong with it at a fundamental level." His request was denied, but the box was moved to a more secure location, accessible only by appointment with special clearance. And there it remains today. But the story gets stranger. In 2003, graduate student Michael Torres was writing his thesis on unsolved New England disappearances. He came across the Wynn case and, with permission, examined the tin box and photographed the photograph with a digital camera. Torres later described what happened in a paranormal research podcast interview. When I got home and uploaded the images, I noticed something strange. In my digital copy, the man appeared to be sitting in a slightly different position than in the original. His head was turned more to the left, as if looking at something out of frame. I thought maybe I'd moved the camera or caught a glare. So the next day, I went back and took more photos, being very careful. But when I looked at those photos on my computer, the position was different again. His hand had moved. His expression had shifted. I compared all the photos side by side. There was no question. The figure was changing, moving slightly between each shot. I know how insane that sounds. Photographs don't move. But something was happening with that image. It was like he was responding, reacting to being photographed. I finished my thesis, but left out the Wynn case entirely. And I've never looked at those digital photos again. They're on an old hard drive in my closet, and they're going to stay there. Torres's thesis advisor confirmed he had initially planned to include the Wynn case, but removed it from the final draft, citing evidentiary concerns. No one has examined the photograph since. In October 1891. The truth is, we'll never know for certain. The case remains officially unsolved. All physical evidence, the drawings, journal, even the building itself, has vanished into history. The boarding house was demolished in 1972. Police records were destroyed or lost. The drawings, if they still exist, are hidden where no one can find them. But there are theories, disturbing theories that have emerged as researchers have pieced together fragments of the story. Some believe Alistair suffered a complete psychological breakdown, that the figure was a hallucination from exhaustion, stress, or medical condition. They argue he somehow escaped through means we haven't discovered and wandered off, leaving Providence forever. It's rational. Comforting. But it doesn't account for the photograph dated October 21st. It doesn't explain why multiple people who studied the case experienced the same phenomenon. It doesn't address why Harold Matthews, who never met Alistair and knew nothing of his experiences, saw the exact same figure. Others propose something darker, that Alistair encountered an entity, supernatural, interdimensional, or otherwise, that gradually inserted itself into his life until it could take his place. According to this theory, the drawings weren't just documentation. They were the mechanism by which the entity gained power. Each time Alistair drew the figure, he gave it more substance, more reality, more presence. The act of creating the images allowed the entity to manifest more fully, to become more real with each stroke. And when Alistair finally drew that last picture, showing his own room with the stranger standing in it, with "Ready" written beneath, he completed the process. He gave the entity permission to take his place, to step out of the drawings and into reality, while Alistair stepped into the shadows, a replacement, an exchange, one existence traded for another. There's a third theory, rarely discussed. It suggests Alistair Wynn is still out there, not in our world, but somewhere parallel to it, somewhere existing just alongside reality, close enough to see through but impossible to reach. And he's trapped there, watching as the entity that took his place walks through the world wearing his life. This theory gained credence in 1978 when a woman researching her family history came across mention of Alistair Wynn. That night, she saw a man outside her fourth-floor apartment window, tall, thin, wearing old-fashioned clothes, staring in with desperate, pleading eyes. He pressed his hand against the glass, she told a reporter. I could see him mouth words, though I couldn't hear them. He looked terrified, lost, like he was trying to warn me. I grabbed my phone to call police, and when I looked back, he was gone. But there was a handprint on the window, on the outside, 4 stories up. Police found no evidence. The handprint was attributed to condensation. But the woman never forgot, and never researched the Wynn case again. The most unsettling aspect isn't the disappearance itself. It's the pattern. If you dig deep enough into historical records, you'll find other cases. Not many, but enough to make you wonder. A Salem portrait artist in 1847 who claimed to be painting the same mysterious figure repeatedly. He vanished from his locked studio 3 months later. A Burlington photographer in 1903 who developed dozens of plates showing a strange man who hadn't been visible when pictures were taken. She disappeared from her darkroom, found locked from inside. A Concord sketch artist in 1929 who filled notebooks with drawings of a gaunt stranger. He was last seen entering his apartment building. When his landlord opened the apartment the next day, the artist was gone. Only his notebooks remained. Different times, different places, different artists, but always the same pattern. Obsessive creation of images showing a figure that seems to exist just outside normal reality. And then, inevitably, the disappearance. Are they all connected? Is there some entity moving through time and space, selecting artists at random, inserting itself into their lives until it can take their place? Or is it something more complex? A phenomenon that occurs when someone with the right creative gift inadvertently opens a door that should remain closed. We'll never know for certain. But here's what we do know. Creativity is a powerful force. The act of creation, bringing something into being through words, images, sounds, is perhaps the most fundamentally human thing we do. We take what exists only in imagination and make it real, manifest it in the physical world. But what if, sometimes, we create something we don't intend to? What if, in trying to capture what we see or imagine, we accidentally give form to something waiting for just such an opportunity? What if our art doesn't just reflect reality, but can, under certain circumstances, alter it? Alistair Wynn was a skilled lithographer who understood how to take something intangible and make it permanent. When he saw the gaunt stranger, whether real or imagined, he did what artists do. He tried to capture it, to understand it through rendering. But perhaps, in doing so, he gave it exactly what it needed to cross over from wherever it had been watching. Perhaps his drawings were never just documentation. Perhaps they were invitations. The case remains unsolved. The questions remain unanswered. And somewhere in a restricted archive in Providence, there is a photograph of a man who may or may not have existed, dated the day before an artist vanished from a locked room. They say if you stare at the photograph long enough, you can see him move. But I wouldn't recommend trying, because sometimes the thing you're watching is watching you back. And sometimes, when you create an image of something, you give it permission to step out of the shadows and into your life. Alistair Wynn learned that lesson. Let's hope we never have to.